The real story here is not that this case isn't going to fizzle. It's going to blow up on them. The real question is what we talked about before. There's a lot more to what they did that nobody knows about yet.
I know some of it.
A lot more to the obstruction of justice, to the collusion, to the fake dossier.
Oh, I know a lot.
Trying to bring Steele back in after he was completely discredited.
And then feed it to Mueller.
Yeah. And Mueller is going to have a lot to answer for.
Mr. Mayor.
I said a long time ago, the investigation here has to be in the investigators.
Okay, so that was last night. Rudy Giuliani was on with Sean Hannity on the Fox News channel saying that the investigation conducted by Robert Mueller is going to backfire on Robert Mueller. So the president's lawyers are pushing for kind of a speedy end to all this, but should we really be expecting it to drag out? That's what kind of markets are looking at and everything else. One of the reasons we talk about it. And we have former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney David Bruno here in the studio in New York with us, and the Washington Examiner White House reporter Gabby Morrongiello also joins us. Gabby is in Washington. Let me start with you, Gabby, on the politics of it and the Washington and the White House's side of all of this. Rudy Giuliani's back and forth there. It's obviously, or it seems obvious to me, there's some spin or there's some public relations in all this and wanting people to think that Robert Mueller's doing something he shouldn't be doing, whatever the case may be. But what have you made of what you've seen here just this week from Giuliani, Sekulow and company and what they're trying to do?
Well, it's an interesting strategy. I mean, here you have the president's outside attorneys, claiming that this investigation is more corrupt than Watergate, but they haven't really provided any examples to back that up. I mean, we know that the president and Rudy Giuliani referenced this weird golf dispute that happened between Mueller and President Trump back in the early 2000s, but beyond that, they haven't really given any evidence as to why this investigation would be more corrupt or would have issues or conflicts of interest at hand. And I do think that they're using this sort of as a tool to prepare themselves for the possibility that if President Trump does decline to sit down for a presidential interview, that Mueller and his team are going to obviously subpoena him to testify before a grand jury. And any conflicts of interest could be used against Mueller as a weapon.
The legal question, David, that I want to talk to you about is that, how this all ends up, I guess, is to some extent anybody's guess, but it's clear if you kind of look through everything that's been said the last few days, whether it's Giuliani or Sekulow, they don't want the president, it seems, talking about obstruction of justice or being asked about it. That seems to be what this all comes down to.
Yeah,
right?
I think, well, first of all, this negotiation about the statement itself has been 8 months. I mean, this is the second counteroffer going back and forth with Mueller. The attorneys are telling the president, no, you should not speak. It's the president that's saying I want to.
They're worried about perjury trap.
They're worried about perjury trap. They're worried about anything that they don't know. I mean, this Mueller investigation is so large. Just look at the Manafort indictment itself.
Right.
That goes back to 15 years ago. Has nothing to do with collusion, right? So what about the president's financial dealings? Who knows? That's why they want to limit the scope. That's why they want to control the interview. And their advice is don't even do it to begin with.
Right. Well, then, as you said, it's up to the president. He's always said that he'd be willing to sit for an interview. What he does is interesting, Gabby. We'll see what he does. At some point, I guess, the decision will have to be made, but also a decision might have to be made by Robert Mueller, right, of how to handle all of this. If the president's saying, his lawyers are basically coming and saying, hey, listen, if you think, you did, here's an item you may have thought that there was a law or rule that was broken, say that the president obstructed justice. Maybe the Mueller team thinks that. His lawyers are basically coming back and saying, well, you can't ask him about that. So, I mean, what's Mueller going to do? You think he uses his subpoena power here at some point? He's going to have to make that call, right?
That's obviously the biggest question and part of this. And, I think what's most interesting is that we have so much insight into what the president is thinking because his lawyers are constantly out there talking about their strategy, talking about the types of questions that would be off the table, things that involve President Trump's firing of James Comey and things that he told James Comey about Michael Flynn. But what we don't know is how Mueller's team is reacting to all of this. We really have no window into what the federal investigators are looking at to ask the president about whether or not they do plan to agree to some of the terms that have been laid out by the president's legal team. It's really, reached a point where we know that the president has these conditions, but we have no idea what Robert Mueller plans to ask him about.
And we haven't throughout the whole thing with Mueller. Even when the indictments came down on the Russians, we had no idea up until he was about to announce them. This is the one place in your town, Gabby, in Washington, that we're not getting leaks out of is Mueller's office, which is kind of interesting and hard to do, David. But if you're advising, and I've heard lawyers say all the time, if I was advising the president, I'd say, do not do this interview. Is there a reason to sit down with Robert Mueller if you're President Trump at this point? Can you think of one?
Sure, PR, for PR purposes.
But what about a legal
He has
reason?
a presidential election in 2 years. You have midterms. He wants to be liked by the country. He wants to be approved. And that is the conflicting interest that the president has with what his lawyers are saying.
So you think he can help himself politically, but there's a big legal risk there.
Absolutely, no. There's some great legal arguments that he has with the executive privilege, even the Fifth Amendment. It's a dangerous area, but it sounds like he wants to move forward. He wants to do this.
Okay, so if he doesn't,
ultimately it's his
you're getting
decision.
into some of those arguments. So let me ask you about the legalities of all this. So the subpoena could come in. So the president says, well, or his lawyers say, the president's not going to testify. Robert Mueller subpoenas him. The president then argues.
Yeah, so they would file a motion to quash in the district court. It actually just happened with Andrew Miller, who's an associate of Roger Stone. And there has to be a legal basis. In the Andrew Miller case, they said that Mueller was outside the scope of his authority. In the president's case, he would argue executive privilege,
right.
Fifth Amendment. He would lodge all of his legal objections to it. Then a D.C. district court would have to make the decision. It's an appealable issue. It could go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court.
Which it probably would, unless the president, like President Clinton did, agreed to the testimony after the subpoena.
If it goes the legal way, it's going to take time. I think it would come after the midterms. I don't think Mueller wants to affect or influence the midterms.
Real quick on that, Gabby, you think there is a political, David's making, he's our legal analyst, but he's saying that there may be some political gains for the president. You think so or no?
I think that his base is so riled up right now and actually buys into this message that this is a witch hunt, that they would actually be more supportive of him refusing to sit down with Bob Mueller, going through the process of being subpoenaed, and then bringing that all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, that
Absolutely.
is interesting. We got to go, David. Thank you. And Gabby as well.